This is the start of the second section with regard to workers' compensation arguments that you can make to help lower your premiums. And this section has to do with potential risk arguments, or arguments about your operation or the business's operation that can help convince the underwriter that you are better than the underwriter might assume otherwise. And so you deserve lower premium. We're going to talk about 6 issues in this video. The first one is a discontinued operation, practice, or procedure. So we talked a little bit about this with regard to individual claims arguments, but it can apply with regard to just exposure arguments generally. So for example, maybe you never had a claim that you can identify that would have been prevented by a change in your operations or a discontinued operation, but still underwriters should know that it is at better risk than they might assume that it is. So for example, let's say that in the past your employees were required to lift 70 pounds or more several times a day, and you've implemented a procedure in the past few years where you actually require nobody to lift more than 5 pounds at a time. You actually have purchased a number of pieces of equipment that do all the lifting for the employees. That would be important for the underwriter to know, especially if in your industry it's typical that employees perform lifting on a regular basis. Another argument that can help your broker lower your premium might be that you've adopted a new safety technique. So for example, perhaps in the past you used ladders and you've discontinued the use of ladders. There isn't necessarily a claim attributed to the use of ladders in the past, but the fact that you've discontinued the use of ladders and that you are now, for example, using man lifts, that would be an important thing for an underwriter to know, especially if the underwriter might be assuming that you're using ladders on a regular basis in your operation. Leased employees. At times, employers have decided that they can circumvent a particular hazardous operation in their industry by leasing employees from a third party to perform that operation. They still sell the service, they still technically perform the operation as a company, but the employees that do the exact work are actually leased from a third party, and so that hazard doesn't exist. Important, if that were the case, important to make sure the underwriter knows that the workers' compensation underwriter is not going to assume that exposure and does not have that exposure to loss going forward. Litigated claims history. There are a number of arguments that could be made here. If you've had a litigated claims history in the past where a number of your claims have ended up being litigated, meaning the claimants have gone out and obtained an attorney, workers' compensation attorney, to represent them. Claim values increase dramatically when this happens on average, and so it's very important that if you've had some kind of litigation claims history that you make an argument as to why you don't expect that'll be a problem in the future. And there could be several arguments. Often litigation takes place in a contagion type way where one employee gets an attorney and then tells another employee, and it ends up that the same attorneys are representing 2 or more employees over time, and often the same physicians end up being involved as well with those attorneys. So that can be a pattern that you've identified that you've somehow taken steps to overcome. Could be family members that used to work for you had a kind of a contagion of litigated claims, and those family members are no longer there. Could be that a bunch of friends have left your employment that used to bring litigated claims. One of the good arguments in this area, litigated claims history, is that you've taken the time to actually explain the workers' compensation to all of your employees, because many litigated claims happen because employees are scared. They're used to meeting with their physician for personal health issues outside of employment, but in workers' compensation they're suddenly thrown into a system with a new clinic, a new doctor, people they don't know what to believe, who's going to look out for them, and sometimes just out of fear and anxiety about, am I going to have my job, am I going to recover? All those things can drive an employee to an attorney. If the employer will take the time to explain workers' compensation and how it works, and the fact that the system is there to protect the employee, and perhaps even bringing in the treating physician, if that's possible, to meet with the employees, that can cause a comfort level that will significantly reduce future litigated claims. Turnover history, very, very good argument. In California in particular, it has been identified that perhaps 40% of all workers' compensation claims occur with employees who are within the first 6 months on the job. So turnover obviously has a big impact. If you have more new employees all the time, you have a much greater exposure to workers' compensation claims than an employer who has very low turnover. So if you have low turnover relative to your industry, that's a very good argument to make you more attractive to underwriters and help to drive the premium down. So for example, if you know that in your industry turnover is on average 25% per year of the total employees at any one firm, and your turnover is 10% or lower, it's important that you convey that to the underwriter. Last topic in this section is differences from your peers in the same classifications. Very important to point out any significant differences in your operation from that are typical for your industry. So, for example, if you are an auto repair operation where the expectation of an underwriter would be that there are automated lifts being used to lift cars up to be worked on from underneath, and in fact you have pits. Pits are determined to be much safer because the employee walks down into the pit. There's virtually no way that the car can come down on the employee in a pit, and so they're deemed to be somewhat safer, and that would be something you would want to point out to your broker so that they can make the argument to the underwriter to drive your premium down for that basis.